All right, so I think we can start. So I welcome you here today. Let me just give you a short introduction before the webinar starts. I will do it in 2 languages today because we have it exceptionally in English. So for those of you who speak both languages, I apologize and will have to ask for your patience. For those who don't know us, we are Students for Liberty. We are a student organization promoting the ideal of the freedom of individual freedom and liberty. And this is our series on famous thinkers and economists and lawyers in the tradition of individualism and, again, liberty and possibly libertarianism, on which today there might be some disagreements. And today we are going to speak about the life and work of Ayn Rand. And one of the reasons, apart from the fact that she is one of the significant contributors to these ideals, is that in August there is going to be a course on her philosophy of objectivism in Prague at CEVRO Institutu, one of our partners, which is also one of the only schools, or the only school in Europe that offers a course in objectivism. The course is going to be happening from the 10th to the 20th of August. There will be 8 evenings. So if you are interested, just reach out to us or go to the link that I'm sending to the chat right now. It will also be in the description of the video on YouTube if you are watching there. So I encourage you to check it out. Or if you are interested for more information after today's webinar, just go there and you will find more details there. And our speaker today is Yernaz. Yernaz will also be one of the speakers at the John Galt School program in August. So this is why we invited him today on this topic. And Yernaz is also connected to CEVRO Institutu, where he studied the PPE program. And he is a political scientist from Netherlands. He has his own YouTube channel. So we are all the more delighted that he decided to visit ours today. And before I pass the word on to him, I will just repeat what I said quickly in Czech for those of us who prefer this language for clarity. Vítám vás na dalším webináři Students for Liberty. Pravděpodobně nás znáte, ale pokud ne, jsme organizace studentská, která se zabývá propagací myšlenek svobody jednotlivce. A dneska se tady budeme bavit o životě a díle Ayn Randové. Důvod, proč to děláme, je kromě toho, že určitě spadá do té tradice významných liberálních myslitelů, o kterých jsme se bavili v posledních 2 měsících, je taky ten, že v srpnu pořádáme v Praze na CEVRO Institutu kurz John Galt School, který se bude zabývat právě její filozofií objektivismu. Bude to 8 večerních přednášek od 10. do 20. srpna. A více detailů najdete na odkazu, který jsme poslali do chatu, anebo ho najdete v popisu na YouTube nebo na naší facebookové stránce, takže určitě nezapadne snad. A pokud vás to dneska zaujme, tak se tam určitě vydejte. Pokud vás to dneska nezaujme, ale chcete se dozvědět víc o objektivismu, tak tam určitě zaměřte, bude to stát za to. A dneska tady poctíme Jernaze, který bude jedním z speakerů v srpnu na John Galt School v Praze. A Yernaz studoval politickou filozofii a ekonomii na CEVRO Institutu v Praze, kde se ten kurz rovně bude konat. A jinak je politický teoretik z Holandska. Věnuje se dlouhodobě holandské politice i dílu Ayn Randové, kterému se věnuje, tuším, od roku 2007, takže rozhodně bude mít o čem mluvit a těšíme se na to. Okay, so back to English. Yernaz, I pass it on to you. Thank you for coming today.
Yes, okay. Can everyone see the presentation I'm sharing with you?
I think they do.
Okay. Oh, they can talk back to me? Okay, no, that's fine. Okay. So what I basically did is I just took the time. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. I'm very happy to talk to you about Ayn Rand, tell you something about her life. I've studied her philosophy for over 13 years. I started in 2007. So I think I'm quite knowledgeable on the topic. So that's why I decided to take this task upon myself. I'll just be talking about the things that happened in her life and like the books she published, etc. If you guys have some questions about her philosophy in specific, I'm open to it maybe after the presentation, but I also don't mind some interaction meanwhile. So yeah, I'm very flexible in that respect. So I think we should start with her birth and early childhood. Here it is described who her father was. Rosenbaum was their last name. Her mother, Anna Borisovna, and she was born in St. Petersburg in 1905. She was born Annalisa Rosenbaum. Later on, when she came to America, she decided to call herself Ayn Rand. People still are not sure where that was based on. Some say it had to do with a certain typewriter of that brand. Other people say that that brand wasn't around at the time she did it. So some say maybe the Ayn was a Finnish name she liked. There are a few theories, we're not sure, but when she was in America, she decided to change her name to Ayn Rand. She was born Annalisa Rosenbaum. And just to give you some impression of how genius this woman was, at the age of 9, she was already writing stories. And as you could see in 1911, at the age of 6, she taught herself how to read. So she was really a child genius at that time in Russia, way before we knew what she would grow out to be. If we then move on to her early teens and the Russian Revolution, a couple of important things. In 1913, she attends her first motion picture. This will be significant because of her relationship with movies and arts in general, so that's why it's relevant. In 1914, she read her first romantic fiction, The Mysterious Valley. That's when she decided to become a writer, so very crucial to her development. And then, of course, in 1917, she was a witness of the first shots of the February Revolution. I will get back to this when I get to her first publication, because it's actually semi-autobiographical. In 1918, she discovers the writings of Victor Hugo. This was very crucial because she fell in love with his way of writing novels, his style, and she tried to use some of that style for herself, or she admired it. So it's very significant that she read Hugo at that time. Her family had to escape the war. They moved to the Ukraine and later on to the Crimea area. Her father, I think, was robbed 3 times by the Russian government, and her father was an independent businessman. So you can already see that's where her first interest and love for capitalism kind of came from. She was very much, she loved her father very much. She admired him very much. She didn't have a great relationship with her mother, but she did very much admire her father. Then in 1920, at the age of 15, she discovers Aristotle's work in high school. This will be crucial to her philosophical development because she calls Aristotle the great master of philosophy, the one true philosopher. So yeah, this was very crucial to her development as a philosopher and as a person. She graduated from her first high school. She went to the Petrograd State University. She discovered Nietzsche. She had a particular relationship with Nietzsche. She actually didn't like his philosophy, but she did like some of his poems. And a lot of people later on will say that objectivism has a lot of relationship to Nietzsche's way of thinking, but it actually has not. It's just a few things that superficially are the same or look the same to people, and they're quite crucial things. So it's the idea of man as a heroic being. That is something that you can find in objectivism and in Nietzsche's thought. Only the difference is in Nietzsche's philosophy, you cannot go from a sheep to a wolf, but in Rand's philosophy, you have free will. So no one is bound to be either a sheep or a wolf. Great difference there between the two. She then went to America. She got in on a sort of visiting visa. She visited, I think it was one of her aunts or uncles. She discovered the movie industry in America, which she very much liked. She decided she wanted to stay there. Her mother, who, as I just said, she didn't have a great relationship with, did do this one amazing thing for her by getting her to America. And she will always be very grateful to her mother, because her mother basically realized that Ayn Rand could not survive in Stalinist Russia or Leninist Russia at the time. And she basically saved her life by sending her to America, because she would not last. She was hired by a great producer, Cecil B. DeMille. He discovered her while he was driving his car. He saw her standing somewhere in Hollywood, and he hired her. So she became a junior screenwriter, and she met her husband, later husband, Frank O'Connor, actually at the set of one of the movies. I think it was a movie about Jesus is King. And Frank O'Connor was like a kind of a B actor at the time. And she was actually an extra in that movie. So it's even possible to find some footage of her standing in a big crowd in a movie from the 1920s. But that's where she met her husband, Frank O'Connor. So it was a very important period for her. Let's see. Again, Frank O'Connor was also very important to her inspiration for the books she would write in the future. As she said herself, is that when she described her male role models, let's say in The Fountainhead and in Atlas Shrugged, that basically Frank O'Connor was like he was the basis of her heroes. Those are her own words. And it's also true that for the cover of The Fountainhead, she used one of his paintings of a sun coming up, and it was called Man Also Rises, and that was a painting by her husband Frank O'Connor. So he also did play a big role in her career later on. Yeah, so then we get to the late 20s, and when she started writing plays or acting as a playwright, as you would say, she became a US citizen in 1931. Very important to her. She wanted to become it very badly. She never wanted to go back to Russia or go to any other place on earth for that matter. In 1932, she sells Red Pawn, one of her stories about Russia, to Universal Pictures. She writes the book Ideal, which was re-released a few years ago by the Ayn Rand Institute in 1934. And her first play, Woman on Trial, which later on would have a different name, opens in Hollywood on October 2nd. Well, as I said, the Woman on Trial was later called The Night of January 16. You can still find this in book form. This play she has written, it's about a jury deciding on whether someone is guilty or not. It's quite a dramatic case, very interesting. And it was published as a play in 1935. And she started scribbling her first notes for The Fountainhead, which would be released in 1943. So you could say she was working on The Fountainhead for about 8 years before releasing it. In 1936, she published We the Living. As I said, we would get back to the February Revolution, because We the Living is a semi-autobiographical book on Ayn Rand's life. The character in the book is called Argunova. That's her last name. And basically, that is Ayn Rand as we understand it. So it's a girl who grows up in a used-to-be wealthy family that has to struggle because of the revolution and the communist takeover. She describes the life of this girl and the struggles she has, choosing sides, falling in love with communist soldiers and freedom fighters. And it has quite a dramatic ending. I won't spoil it. But this is actually the most personal book she has written in that respect, when it comes to her experience in Russia and what she thought about the revolution. So that's why We the Living was very special. But this book was also not accepted by everyone, and that's why it was first published in England before it. Sorry, I'm mistaken. I'm talking about Anthem. Then in 1938, she published Anthem, but she published that in England because she couldn't get it published in America. Anthem is a short story. It's about 100 pages, where she actually talks about the discovery of the individual. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but it's a beautiful little book of 100 pages. And in 1939, she received the last communications from her parents. She never knew what happened to them. She just assumed they died, but it's not clear how they died and whether or not it has something to do with her. But yeah, it's pretty tragic that that was the last communication she received from them. In 1940, she worked for the Wendell Willkie presidential campaign. It's quite special for her to do that. She only supported, I think, 2 presidents. It was Wendell Willkie, and I think she supported Barry Goldwater in 1964. She may have said, I would vote Nixon over Ford because Ford hates the country, but she didn't support Nixon. So that's why it's quite special for her to make the step of becoming politically active when later on she would not, even though she would be very much politically pronounced in later years. So this is where Ayn Rand, the novelist, is born in the 1930s. Her first 2 books are published. And in 1942, she was finished with The Fountainhead as a manuscript, and it would be released a year later. It was published by Bobbs Merrill, but she brought this book to 12 other publishers, and they all turned it down. So it was the 13th one that said yes, and it was an amazing success for them, for Ayn Rand, for objectivism. Still an amazing book. As I said, in 1943, she published The Fountainhead, and she began writing The Moral Basis of Individualism. She moved to California to write the screenplay for The Fountainhead. There's actually a movie that came from this. It's from 1949 with Gary Cooper as the strong silent type playing Howard Rourke, and Patricia O'Neill playing the female lead, Dominique Francois. It's an amazing movie. I've seen it over 100 times. It's really something you could watch. You can find it for free on the internet. And then in 1945, she started working on Atlas Shrugged. It was released in 1957, so she worked between the 10 and 12 years on this book, even longer than the 8 years she worked on The Fountainhead. The Fountainhead reached number 6 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's to this day an enormous classic that still sells a lot of books. And it should be time for a movie remake, if you ask me. If you want to ask me something about The Fountainhead after the presentation is done, I'm totally open to answering it. I think it's my favorite Ayn Rand novel, and I would really recommend it to all of you. If I could just say something about the plot, it's basically about an architect that wants to make it, wants to build things, wants to design things in his own vision, and he comes and he stumbles across a lot of people who don't want that and who think very differently. And there you will see the role that philosophy plays, and it's like brilliantly done. So it took until 1946, so I think this was 8 years after publication in the UK that she got Anthem published in the US. That says something. The Fountainhead movie opened, it says here, in 1946. I always thought it was 1949, but this is from the official Ayn Rand website, so take their word for it. She moved back to New York in 1951. She was very much in love with the city of New York. She was never really in love with Los Angeles, but she was there because of the movie studio in the beginning. And she started writing Galt's speech. This is a part of the book Atlas Shrugged. I don't want to spoil this either, so I won't say what type of part it is, but it's a very important part. She finished this in 1955. They say she it took her almost 2 years to finish this 80-page part. So you could imagine the work that had gone into it. And then finally, in 1957, she finished writing Atlas Shrugged. And actually, this is the date that a lot of objectivists would consider that the philosophy is kind of is complete. They would say that her development also to that point was magnified by this book. So that's why a lot of people would consider Atlas Shrugged as also the beginning of objectivism. But people can debate that point. It doesn't matter. So it got published October 10th. It was an amazing success, but it was also a source of a lot of disappointment in Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand, like many other, famous novelists, had this notion that when people read her work and see how true it is what she is saying, they will be persuaded. She thought that the great intellectuals, the great economists, maybe those who already are on like the good side of philosophy but haven't really grasped the full extent of her philosophy, she expected them to fall in line, basically. She really expected them to tell her, thank you for doing this. Now we know what we're fighting for. You have completed the Declaration of Independence with like a philosophical pamphlet. Let's adopt this. And of course, as you could predict, that didn't happen. Yes, she had a lot of fans. Yes, it was a bestseller, but she was savaged by two different sides. She was savaged by the conservatives, mainly William F. Buckley, and the National Review published an article by, I forget the name, Whittaker Chambers, a very popular conservative at the time. And he basically compared her book to Nazi propaganda. He said something along the lines of, when I read lines in this book, all I can hear is off to the gas chambers go. Wow. That's pretty crazy because none of that is in the book. So she was basically savaged by conservatives because she denounced God. She was obviously savaged by the left because she denounced socialism. So she felt quite alone. She couldn't join the libertarians of the time because, something I could return to later on, she felt they didn't have the right philosophical underpinnings, and also they did not accept her philosophy fully. Some of them did, and we still see her influence in the libertarian movement, but it was not a happy marriage between the two. So she was kind of outboxed. She did have popular support among the people who bought her book, wanted to go to her teachings, to her lessons, wanted to see her movies, but she didn't get the intellectual or media or establishment support she might have expected to get. So yes, it was a great moment for her, but it was also a great personal disappointment. And it was actually the denouncement of Atlas Shrugged that probably spurred her on to write nonfiction. I think she felt the need to write nonfiction because she saw how she was still so misunderstood, even if you don't want to believe it's sincere. She thought, okay, I thought I was very clear in my 4 earlier novels, but apparently I have to really spell it out for you guys. So that's when she decided, and luckily for us, to write also nonfiction, and I will tell you more about that in the coming slides. So you can see in 1960, she also started giving public talks at universities, at military academies, and her first campus talk was Fate and Force, the Destroyers of Our Modern World at Yale University. I saw a poll once in a book on Ayn Rand, a biography that said that among the student population, she was quite popular. Some say 12% or 6%. At least it was some significant number of students who were really into what she was promoting. In 1961, she published For the New Intellectual. It's quite a modest book, I think about 80 pages, talking about the intellectual bankruptcy of our age. And she also started writing the Objectivist newsletter, This was a bi-weekly newsletter that she published, where she would just write columns about sometimes TV programs, sometimes laws that were being proposed. It could be about almost anything relating to objectivism or philosophy, so basically anything. And she had a student, Nathaniel Brandon, a great admirer of her, and he was amazing when it came to psychology. He has also written a number of books, and that's why she decided to open the Nathaniel Brandon Institute. This could actually be seen as a philosophical objectivism institute. So while the Ayn Rand Institute now is focused on politics, public policy, and culture, the Nathaniel Brandon Institute, NBI, was more focused on things like psychology, self-esteem, romantic relationships, those type of topics. Very interesting, but a little bit different than the pure philosophical view. So it was really nice and complementary, adding to what objectivism already did. She had a weekly column in the Los Angeles Times. This is also an indication of her popularity, that they would ask someone with those views to write for them. It means she wasn't that far out of the mainstream as people might have thought. Here we began to see in the 60s also that Ayn Rand is a real public intellectual. Her fame is only getting bigger. Her accolades also. She received the honorary doctorate from Lewis and Clark in 1963. She published The Virtue of Selfishness. This is the book I consider to be the best introduction if you want to get into objectivism from the nonfiction angle. So if you don't want to read the novels, or if you already have read the novels and you really want to understand the philosophy, the terms, the technique behind it, and the concretes, then I would really recommend starting with The Virtue of Selfishness. The first chapter is quite long, but actually every other chapter is quite short. So if you get to the first chapter, which is crucial, all the other chapters are like 6-7 pages, very, very easily to read, and very dense in content. So it's like 8 pages, but you get a lot out of it. So please read The Virtue of Selfishness. In total, I think it's 140 pages. Then she started writing on Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. This will later on be published as a book, and the abbreviation is ITOE. I have to say, this is, in my estimation, and maybe Jan wants to comment on it, the most difficult book she has written and the most technical book to understand. I would really not jump into this one, but really start with the other nonfiction books and then work your way up to this one. But if you understand this book, you really understand objectivism. It's her most technical book. In 1976, she makes her first appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Again, you can see she's getting more popular. She's like an icon. You can find most of these interviews on YouTube, the Johnny Carson one, and she has, I think, 3 other late night talk show interviews. Very good. Then there was a dispute with Nathaniel Brandon in the personal sphere. If you want to know, you can ask me later. But long story short, they broke it off. So the Nathaniel Brandon Institute closed. I consider this very much a big punch to objectivism and the development there was, and the potential for it in the 1970s and 60s. So I think, yeah, if the Institute would have stood, we would have been way further now. But unfortunately, that's how it goes sometimes. Then we get into the 1996, on the age of the 70s, she witnesses the launch of Apollo 11. She would later on write an article or column about this in Philosophy Who Needs It. Her admiration of, space exploration, the philosophy, the morality behind it. It's very unique angle she takes. You cannot compare it to anyone else. Then she, in 1974, gave one of her most seminal talks, Philosophy Who Needs It. She gave it at the West Point Military Academy. I think it's one of her best columns. It's also the first chapter of the book called Philosophy Who Needs It. And yeah, it's one of the most amazing columns you will ever find. Another important thing, she attends a White House dinner for Alan Greenspan swearing in. You want to ask me about Alan Greenspan? You totally can. He used to be one of her students, and later on in, I think, 2006, he denounced her. But according to a lot of objectivists, he was never really an objectivist. But that's something up for debate, perhaps. But she was close to him at that time. Yeah, she published her last article in the Ayn Rand letter. I think this came after the Objectivist newsletter. She called it the Ayn Rand letter. And she attends a White House dinner, attending Malcolm Fraser. As you see, true cultural icon gets invited to the White House, doing talk shows. And the Ford Hall Forum holds a luncheon in her honor. And there were plans to have an Atlas Shrugged television miniseries. It's actually a funny story about this. The guy behind The Godfather, the movies that came out early 70s, actually wanted to make a movie about Atlas Shrugged, and he wanted to put like Clint Eastwood in it and Sarah Fawcett. But Rand did not want that. She didn't want to abbreviate it. She didn't want to give in on some demands he had to make it into like a nice movie suited for the box office. So they never came to agreement, but can you imagine how amazing it would have been if the maker of The Godfather would have produced Atlas Shrugged in the end of the 70s? Sometimes I wish he would have still. This television miniseries never got made. So the movies that were made a couple of years ago were something totally different, and they were also quite terrible. Then we get to the last slide, because unfortunately she died in 1982. So she went on with the introduction to ITOE, which was published in 1979. Her husband unfortunately died in 1997. This really destroyed her emotionally. She gave the last lecture, The Age of Mediocrity, and the last public lecture, The Sanction of the Victims. You can still find this on YouTube. You can really see that she's quite old, but she's still very sharp. She denounced Ronald Reagan for being against abortion. Yeah, if you just look for The Sanction of the Victim, Ayn Rand's last public lecture, you can find it on YouTube. And she writes her last page of the Atlas Shrugged teleplay, which never got produced. And she died in New York City in March 6, 1982. After her death in 1985 and 86, Leonard Peikoff, her intellectual heir, those are her words, founded the Ayn Rand Institute. And they have been working ever since, spreading her philosophy, handing out free books to students. They have a program for teachers that they send them 3 of her novels for all the kids they want to show the book. So they're very much busy promoting her work. But later on, you had other organizations, just like the one promoting the John Galt School we'll be having. That is the Ayn Rand Center. So yeah, there was, of course, a lot of development also in the libertarian scene about how to view Ayn Rand. I would say that libertarians' view of her has gone up ever since that time, because they were mortal enemies at that time, so it couldn't really have gone down. But I would not still say she is fully accepted as the greatest one for libertarians. They usually like Murray Rothbard or Friedman or sometimes Robert Nozick. But I do think the influence of Ayn Rand is still very big. You can pinpoint it to every time a Democrat gets in charge of the White House. The sale of Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead always goes up. It happened to Obama. She sold 1 million books one of those years. So it's quite amazing for this woman to have sold over 30 million books in a language that is not even her native language. Yeah, I can still admire it a lot. But yeah, this was quite a succinct, I think it's 40 minutes, yeah, story about her life. Jan?
Yes. Okay, so thank you for the talk, and I hope we will have some questions. And just maybe before you think of some, we have a commentary in the chat that some of the books are translated into Czech,
Okay.
and it's true. One of them are most of them are the novels. So the Fontanet is translated as Zdroj. Atlas Shrugged is translated as Atlas of Spoda. And out of the nonfiction books, I believe only The Virtue of Selfishness is translated as Sobecki. Oh, I sorry, I was just reminded that I believe Anthem was translated this year, but I am not quite sure of the Czech name at this point. Okay, sorry. So, did I interrupt you? Were we going to continue, or should we go on to questions?
If there are questions, let them come on. Sure.
Okay, so does anybody have questions? You can just turn on your microphones and ask, or you can send a message into chat.
Is there maybe something I said that you want to add something to? Like I could have missed a little detail. I'm totally fine with that, Jan.
No, I don't think I have anything to add, so let's just open it for questions if you have any.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, it seems we don't have any questions now. So maybe let me ask you, because
Sure.
I think that's been quite, there is something that has been quite often discussed recently with ARY, the Ayn Rand Institute taking the, I believe it was the coronavirus support or some sort of subsidy. And that sort of revived the discussion about that is very often used as a sort of, let's say, accusation of hypocrisy on Ayn Rand's behalf, that she supposedly took social security. So what would you say to this criticism?
Yeah, so like I don't mind the criticism. I just don't like the dishonesty behind it, because if you just look at what Ayn Rand herself said, then it's not hypocritical. So like if you still want to say it's wrong, fine. Like if you want to say it's strategically wrong, or if you want to say you still shouldn't do it for some reason, okay, I can get that. But I don't like the idea that they portray Rand as being hypocritical or the Institute as being hypocritical, because just look it up. Her standpoint has always been this: never advocate for government programs, never advocate for them to be enlarged or for them not to be abolished, because the moment you do that, that is immoral. If you're also taking the money, it's even more immoral, because you're not only defending something bad, you're doing it because you want to take the money. But in a different situation where you're going against those programs, but you're still obliged to pay taxes to fund those programs, what is the logic behind not taking it? I think the logic behind not taking it really goes back to like the Christian roots of sort of like martyrdom. It's like, if you want to be moral, you have to suffer for your morality. Only then can we take you seriously. That seems to me to be like the underlying thing behind people mocking this. But I don't get it. Like, I'm not a martyr. No one should be a martyr if it's not necessary, right? Like, life is hard enough being in a niche political philosophy as it is. So I see no reason why people who pay taxes and who advocate for the right policies should also make themselves a martyr for no other reason than to please people who don't agree with them and who are fighting them politically. So if you want to make the point that it was strategically not sound, maybe you're right. I don't know how much money it was in total, but it's not hypocritical. Do you have something to that?
Okay, thank you for the answer. That was just something I think that was maybe the most...
Yeah, it's a natural question too, right? I get it. Yeah.
Okay, so was anybody inspired to ask any questions, or does anybody want to comment or something, or challenge some points?
Or maybe they're not so familiar with her, so they don't have the grounds to ask a question, perhaps. I'm not sure. But
So hopefully that will change if they attend the program in August. So, to which we again invite you all.
Yeah.
Check the.
So it's no problem.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I think like I see that there's only like 4 or 5 people, so probably the people who really didn't know her came into the chat, I'm guessing. So then it kind of makes sense for them not to have a lot of follow-up questions at this point.
So maybe I have one more question. So,
Sure.
so that maybe we can open new topics. Because you talked mostly about her books, and when she talks about her own writing, she classifies herself as a romantic realist. So would you maybe sort of explain what it means for her books, or what style the books are written in, what people should expect when they start reading Ayn Rand books?
So the style she liked in like Victor Hugo that I mentioned in the slide, she liked the romanticism, and what she meant by that is describing the world as it should be and not the world as it is. So I think that is the core of what makes her writing very, very nice, or at least motivates her writing, let's say it like that. So, but I think Yiri might have some more, because I think he wants to come on the mic. But that's what I understand as the core of the romantic realism, that you describe people as they should be or could be, and not as they are, or reality, as we say. But I have to say, this is not my specialty, like, but you can find more information in the book, The Romantic Manifesto, where she has written about this. And she also published 2 books, The Art of Writing Fiction and The Art of Writing Nonfiction. So she has explained this quite in detail. But if you look at the writers she likes, you will see like a common thread among them. And Victor Hugo is the best example of the writing she likes, the style.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. I think you can also see a lot of inspiration by Hugo, especially maybe in the Living, when there are characters specifically based on miserables. So
yeah.
Okay. And
I
again,
think it's something aspirational. I think it's something aspirational about the characters that she likes.
Yeah, I think also quite often this is taken as criticism again, that she doesn't portray real world characters, that they, which is sometimes described as criticism of her novels from the literary point of view, but it's actually an intention, because she tries to portray ideal people rather than depict everyday characters.
Yeah, but like, I think even that criticism is a little bit dumb, because even her like major characters still show like quite some humanity but like, you really have to read the books, like, to know it all. Like, if you just read like a description, you might think, oh, this is like the good guy who could only do good things because he's the good guy in her books. But actually, it's not that simple. It's a little bit more pronounced than in other books, but I actually find that there is quite some depth to some of her characters. But
yeah, I
for
agree.
each to judge on their own.
And I have to insert one more advertisement into this. We are going to have on the course in August, we are going to have a lecture on her writing, and specifically on the book Fountainhead, with Dr. Esther Nova, who teaches objectivism at CEVRO. So it will definitely be worth it, and you will hear more information about her novel there, or we will be able to discuss more in detail these topics. Okay, so do we have any questions now, or does anybody want to start a new topic maybe?
If I can just add, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, this is your. Just let me add to the criticism that she is portraying her heroes as people. I mean, as the world, or people who are not the average or photo, from the reality. This would, if she approached the art this way, it would completely destroy the purpose of art. I mean, her novels and her approach directly ties to her whole philosophy and her theory of art. So, this is a long story, of course. So, if she just made a photo of people, this would completely destroy the whole purpose of art and its philosophical role, which she, of course, extensively discusses in the Romantic Manifesto and elsewhere. So this is just out of question that this criticism could have anything to do with what art should deliver. I was just gonna, point people. I see just three people on it here. So anyway, there's a chat there. So I put some things into the chat. So if anyone is interested, just see what I wrote in the chat. Specifically or most importantly, the third one, which is directly related to the topic of this webinar about Ayn Rand and her personality. I cannot find anything better than what I wrote, what I read in this essay by, well, not essay, I don't know if it's essay, it's just memoir. My 30 years with Ayn Rand. It's available, I think, in Ayn Rand in the Ayn Rand Institute campus. So if you want to know more about her personality, this is not something to be missed. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, it will also be available later on YouTube. So if you want, you can then repost the comments there, because I don't think we recorded chat here. So do we have more questions now, or? Okay, maybe if we don't have more questions, let me throw at you one more criticism that is often heard of Ayn Rand.
Sure.
So I think that very often she and the collective around her is criticized as dogmatic, excommunicating or boycotting dissenters and so on, or not very tolerant of alternative opinions. So do you think there is some merit in this criticism?
Ooh, well, like I'm sure there were some things that happened that, in hindsight, it would have been better for the movement perhaps to not have done it. Or, we talked about Nathaniel Branden a little bit. If you look at the quality of his work, you could say it would have been better for objectivism if he was still there. But, at the end of the day, these are people, right? People can choose to hang out or not hang out, right? So that's a little bit difficult to put it as a criticism of the philosophy, because you might say some of the early objectivists might have been too dogmatic, but I don't think the philosophy itself is dogmatic. So sometimes I hear these stories like, oh, if you listen to the wrong music, you get excommunicated. That I don't buy, right? I totally buy that there are like philosophical differences and people get mad at each other, and you and I might think this is not as big of a difference as they think it is, but I don't really believe people were sent away for liking the wrong music. So, for instance, Murray Rothbard, right? He used to be a student of Ayn Rand, and then he decided to marry a Christian woman. And he says that is the basis of why they disagreed. But if you look at the content, like objectivism is a secular, or is like a atheist philosophy. You are a student of Ayn Rand. You like her philosophy. If you then tell her, I'm going to marry someone who denounces this entire philosophy that I really much like, I can imagine her saying something like, okay, where is your value system? Now, you might say you could never criticize someone for who they want to marry, but is that really true? like, he should be free to marry who he wants, obviously. But I can kind of imagine that if I'm hosting an objectivist community and you, Jan, tell me that you're marrying a committed communist, I don't know if you're the greatest person to be in the group, right? So there might have been some exaggeration. I'm really not going to say there was no dogmatism. I'm just saying if some of those differences, especially when you're talking about a new philosophy, so it could have been tainted from the get-go, I can kind of get the dogmatism a little bit better, but I'm happy to see that now it has become a little bit less. So, maybe it was something for that time because they had to survive as a group, as a philosophy, that it might have been tainted back then. So I'm trying to be nuanced about it, but obviously you and me, we're both not there, right? So it's a little bit difficult to judge, but like someone like Nathaniel Brandon, I obviously like his work. So, he could have been added in that sense, but I don't know their personal relationships. But maybe Yeri wants to comment on it?
All right, thank you for the response.
Yes, like if there's no more questions, can I then leave the chat? I mean,
all right, so let's just make a last call for questions. Do we have any at this point?
Sure. I see something in the chat, or is that about something else?
No, there are just comments.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I believe we are out of questions.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
So if
no problem.
this is really the case, I thank you again for the talk today. And once more, I invite all of you who are still here or who are watching on YouTube to the lectures we are having in August at CEVRO Institutu in Prague. It will be from the 10th to 20th. It will be mostly in Czech, with a few lectures from host speakers from abroad, like Yernaz is, or like Dr. Nova. And we are all looking forward to seeing you there. So thank you, and thank you to Yernaz again. Have a great evening.
Jan, can you just send me the link for the YouTube show?
I will.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to tell you guys something about Rand. Hopefully you go to the John Galt School, read her books, anything you could do to get deeper into the philosophy. I will be very happy with that. So good night.